Dare to enter Crow's Quill's books, where tales of forgotten realms and fearless souls come alive. Today's journey, Plato Wyngard and the Valley of the Immortals, chapters 21 to 24, by Mark and James Lindsay. Will you uncover the truth hidden in the shadows? Chapter 21. 1 minute. Bian was gripping onto the rope, and the next she was falling. "No!" Luther screamed as he watched helplessly from above. Bian dropped, her hands desperately grasping for purchase, eyes wide with terror. To Luther it occurred in slow motion. Bian tried to scream, but the sound was muted. Then she collided with Nat, who could do nothing to get out of her way. The two collided, Bian's momentum and flailing limbs striking Nat in the face, his hands letting go of the rope, and on reflex going to his face for protection. Now the combined mass of Bian and Nat dropped from the shaft and through the ceiling of the cave. Plato didn't so much see what was happening as he heard the commotion from above. Trying to ignore the noise, he put all of his efforts into moving the scaffolding and prayed that it would be enough. The bamboo structure lurched the final 2 feet, just as Plato's 2 companions struck the top landing, their bodies hitting with a heavy thud. There was a long moment of silence as Plato struggled to see what was happening. Then a loud, triumphant roar from Luther echoed through the cave, and Plato knew that he had caught them. Several minutes later, Luther, Bian, and Nat climbed down from the scaffold and on to terra firma. Bian leapt into Plato's arms and hugged him tightly, only releasing him with a blushing face when she realized what she was doing. Nat nearly followed suit, but caught himself at the last minute, the ego of youth holding him in check. "Well done, brother," Luther said, and clasped his friend on the shoulder. "That was too close. Something I'm sure none of us want to repeat," Plato said. Bian wrinkled her nose. "Is that palm oil I can smell?" Bian asked. Plato nodded, then relayed everything that had happened. They all looked around at their surroundings, their recent near-death experience momentarily forgotten as astonishment took its place. The huge area in which they stood was nearly full to capacity with large urns, pots, and jugs. Each color represented a specific item, and each item contained within a cordoned area. "Do you realize the planning and work required to do all this?" Bian said in awe. "Considering how long this has been here, yes, I think we do," Luther said. They knew it wouldn't be long until the Wraith and her men found them down in the cavern, so they attempted to move the scaffold from the vertical shaft. With the extra muscle present, Plato assumed the task would be easy. He was wrong. Due to its age and the stress which had recently been placed on it, one of the wheels simply snapped. "Shit," Plato growled. They tried unsuccessfully several times to move the structure. On the last, Luther kicked another wheel, only for it to snap as well. "I think the gods have spoken," Nat said, and even though nobody replied, that's exactly what they all thought. "Now what?" Bian said in frustration. "Find a way out and prepare for visitors," Plato said. Plato took Bian and began searching for an exit, while Luther and Nat concentrated on an appropriate reception for the Wraith. After several minutes of searching, Plato and Bian found what they were looking for, though it wasn't everything they had hoped for. Centuries earlier, the mouth of the cave had either been filled in with heavy rocks by the local people or a landslide. Either way, there was no way the 4 of them were going to be able to budge the rocks in the small time allotted to them. The fact that Luther and Nat were also having problems preparing a defense, as the advancing enemy now had the high ground, as well as a means of reaching them, not to mention there was almost no cover to speak of. The one thing we know for certain is that we have enemy inbound, no immediate means of escape, and a small amount of ammunition. Plato noted. And unless we plan on planting a field or preparing a meal, we have nothing. Plato silenced not with a wave of his hand. I wouldn't say that was the only ingredient available to us, Plato said, and showed them the shattered blue pot. Is that what I think it is? Luther asked, already knowing the answer to his question. They conducted a quick inventory and counted 12 large urns of gunpowder. Although the idea of so much explosive in our possession appears like the answer to our prayers, it also poses a myriad of problems, Plato said. Such as? Bion asked. Well, we're kind of assuming that these 12 urns are the only ones containing the powder. And even if that's true, igniting any one of those urns could lead to the collapse of this entire cavern, Plato said. But if we were to detonate 2 smallish explosions, we could take down the scaffold and clear the exit, Luther added. So what's the problem? Not asked. Neither Luther nor I have a great deal of experience in dealing with this substance. Incorrect calculations could be catastrophic in this confined space, Plato said. Bion placed a hand on his arm. I believe in you, Bion said simply. Me too. Besides, what choice have we got? Not added. That's the spirit, Plato said, and they all burst out laughing. Once the laughter died, Plato told them what he planned to do. Chapter 22. The Wraith was never one to have a great deal of patience with others. Her previous incarnation as a sniper during the American War had created a warrior who preferred the option of working alone. Although she hated relying on the competence of others, she used fear as a tool when delegating. Their journey through the network of tunnels hadn't been easy. Her prey had left numerous traps along the way, resulting in the death of many of her subordinates. Not that she cared about their fate, but what she did care about was her progress or lack thereof. The Wraith's minions knew better than to argue against any order their mistress issued. The price for disobedience was death, if you were lucky. So the Wraith's progress had been slow, losing soldiers to booby traps, falls down shafts, and the occasional resistance of her prey. She sensed that she was near the end of her pursuit. She was now at the deep shaft where Bion and Not had nearly lost their lives. Her men had sent word that the shaft opened out into a large cavern filled with ancient urns, but more importantly, a means of reaching the ground, the scaffold. Is there any sight of my prey? The Wraith asked her lieutenant. Nothing yet, the lieutenant replied. I want this chase ended. Ensure all available men are involved in the assault into the cavern, the Wraith ordered. But mistress, don't question me, the Wraith thundered. Her lieutenant simply bowed and rushed away, eager to distance himself from her rage and to begin their assault. Half a dozen ropes dropped through the ceiling of the cave, and almost immediately black-clad soldiers began their entry into the cavern. They rappelled almost on top of each other, with barely a break between them. The first 6 already on the scaffolding, then poured down the bamboo structure like ants. Within minutes, almost the entire force at the Wraith's disposal was in the cave and on the scaffolding, the very first of their number nearly on the ground. They're nearly there, Luther whispered. The big man was peering out from a small outcrop of rock, the only place that he and Plato deemed safe for what they had planned. Just say when, Plato replied with a grunt. They were all squeezed in tight with no room to move. There was a long pause as Luther watched the Wraith's men descend the scaffolding. Wait. Now, Luther said calmly. Plato struck a match and held the flame to the ground, where it ignited a patch of gunpowder at his feet. The gunpowder lit with a hiss and ran off across the earth, following a path that had been carefully laid. One of the soldiers at the top of the tower was the first to see it. From a distance, it looked like a bright spark traveling at high speed. It weaved through the cave around urns and jugs. Then halfway to the tower it split into two, one moving towards a section of wall, the other towards the bamboo tower. The soldier now recognized what it was. "Look out!" the soldier screamed. Only his warning came too late. The first soldiers were just reaching the ground when the flaming spark came into view. Their eyes went wide as the spark ran straight into the end of a blue urn. Plato's and Luther's calculations were almost perfectly timed. Both explosions went off at the same time. The base of the bamboo scaffold exploded as the rock-covered exit blew out. The entire cavern was rocked by the dual explosions. Plato and his team huddled together and prayed that their luck would hold out. Chapter 23. Luther clutched Plato's shoulder and gave him a quick shake. Despite the fact that he was yelling, neither man could hear through the ringing in their ears. Luther looked down and mouthed the words, "It's okay." Plato looked down to find Bion unconscious in his arms, and Nat was sitting on a boulder behind Luther, nursing a ruined packet of cigarettes, his expression akin to someone just having lost a loved one. Plato tried to shake the cobwebs from his head and work out whether they had improved their situation or made matters worse. A ragged hole now stood where they had planted the explosives, and water was flowing in at a steady rate. Plato turned to where the scaffolding had once stood and was pleased to see that not only was it not standing, but the bamboo structure had been completely pulverized, with no soldiers nor the wraith in sight. One problem solved, he thought. Now how to deal with the rapidly rising water. Just then a large boulder dropped, opening the exit further. What had been just a steady flow of water now became a rushing torrent. Plato knew that if they didn't act soon, the cavern would flood, and the idea of them drowning or being picked off by the remnants of the Wraith's death squad didn't appeal to him. Plato handed the sleeping form of Bion to Nat. "See if you can wake her, but be gentle," Plato said, and Nat nodded. "Ideas?" Plato asked Luther, who looked a little surprised. "That explosion must have knocked you around a bit. I'm surprised you don't already have a plan devised," Luther said. "It's not for lack of trying," Plato said sheepishly. Nat had now managed to rouse Bion from her slumber, and the young woman was struggling to get to her feet. "Sit still while you have the opportunity," Plato advised. Bion didn't reply as she stared at the hole in the cavern wall where water was now flooding in, the force of it slowly eroding the mouth wider and wider. "We're going to have to get out of here very soon," Bion stated. "We're aware of the situation," Plato replied shortly. Bion was now getting to her feet, pushing away Nat, who in turn was trying to get her to remain seated. "I realize that you're attempting to extricate us from this situation, but before you make a rash decision, I just want to inform you that the hole that you have blown appears to be parallel to the river," Bion said. "I don't see how we are going to use this information," Luther asked. "Most of the rivers that run through this region are lowland rivers, their depths varying from 3 to 6 meters. So, there's no way that this cavern will fill completely," Bion said. "I'm still not sure how this geography lesson is going to help," Luther asked. "She's right. I think that we're all in agreement that the way we entered this cave is out of the question," Plato said. "Well, we can't very well just swim out through that hole in the cave. The water pressure is too strong," Nat said. "No, not yet. But if we wait, and not very long," Plato said, as the water was now pooling around their knees. "Bion is right. The water from the river will only rise to the same level as that which flows outside. So, if we wait, we will be able to swim out through the hole and into the river," Luther added. "Exactly," Well done, Ms. Lamb, Plato said admiringly. As long as she's correct with her assumptions, Not said, not sounding convinced of their theory. They didn't have to wait long as the water poured in like a torrent. Within 10 minutes, the four of them were treading water, and Plato announced to his team that they were ready to test Bian's theory and depart the cave. Both Luther and Plato instructed the other two how to properly saturate their lungs in preparation for an extended dive. Plato hoped that it wouldn't be the case, but it was better to prepare for the worst, knowing that the longer they remained, the more chance of fatigue setting in. Or worse, the wraith catching them in this position. It would be like shooting fish in a barrel. Plato warned them all out and cracked a psi loom stick, which he produced from his pack, the green glow somehow giving them all a reassuring feel about the choices they had made. Remember, don't panic. Stay close, and most importantly, don't drown, Plato said with a smile. Then, one at a time, they took a deep breath and ducked below the surface of the water and into the dark depths below. So you failed again? The Viper said, not even trying to hide the pleasure he was getting from this conversation. He was speaking into a radio handset located in a dark communications room. Our prey is wilier than anticipated. The wraith's voice cracked back through the speaker. The general won't be interested in your excuses, only results, the Viper replied. There was a long silence. I'm not going to argue the necessity of our mission, only that for the immediate future, I am currently unable to continue the chase, the wraith said. The Viper grinned widely, for now he knew his moment of truth was at hand. He would show the general who the true successor was, and if he could humiliate that cold bitch in the process, all the better. So where exactly have you been? The wraith asked, attempting to change the subject. You know I was sent to find out more about the wolves, the Viper said, clearly irritated by the turn of their conversation, her poorly disguised attempt in pointing the finger at him. And? General Toon is correct. They are also after the 4 immortals, the Viper replied. Then they will die, too. The surface of the Cho Song Chan, or the Dogleg River, named by the locals for its unusual shape, was calm and serene at that time of the day, the midday heat driving the fishermen away temporarily. A large bubble broke the surface, then another. This was followed by a long succession, then finally a woman's head exploded from the dark depths. Bian Lam gasped for breath. Her mind couldn't comprehend anything other than the need for oxygen. She gulped and spluttered, her chest heaving from the heavy exertion of swimming underwater. Once Bian had managed to control herself, she realized that she was completely alone. Plato, Luther, Bian called out, as she tried valiantly to peer into the murky river water. Summoning courage, she thrust her head beneath the surface of the water, trying to catch a glimpse of her friends, with no success. Starting to panic and with no idea what to do next, Bian was about to swim to the nearest bank when 3 more heads erupted from the river. First Luther and then Plato, who supported a semi-conscious Knot in his arms. With Bian's assistance, the 3 of them dragged Knot to the riverbank. All 4 were exhausted as they crawled up the side and lay panting, covered in mud. You really know how to show a girl a good time, Bian muttered out loud. There was a moment of silence, then laughter erupted from the 3 men, Bian joining their reaction to her statement, but more from exhilaration at being alive. Chapter 24. Plato and his motley crew were holed up on a 60-foot motor fishing vessel, MFV, in the middle of Halong Bay on the north coast. Plato and his team had needed a safe house to set up a plan to capture the 3rd immortal. Plato had injured his arm during their escape from the cave. Luckily, Bion had been able to stitch it up, as well as Luther's gunshot wound received from the Wraith's men in the cavern. Bion had been concerned that the delay in medical attention and their exposure to the dank river water might lead to infection, but the two ex-soldiers' resilience proved that they were fighters. Plato was grateful that Nott had proven to be such a resourceful young man. Within 12 hours, Nott had called in some favors, and they were now aboard the 60-foot boat and setting off under the guise of a squidding expedition. Nott had also set up a store of necessities, including 5 cartons of cigarettes. The captain, Robert Schmidt, was an Australian entrepreneur who had the fortitude to come to Vietnam straight after the American occupation ended, because, as he put it, "This amazing part of the world is ready for a rebirth and I want to help out." Of course, setting up a profitable business doesn't hurt either. Luther spent a large portion of the evening sleeping and healing while Nott played cards with the fishermen. This enabled Plato to clear his head and also get to know Bion a little better. She talked about her childhood and siblings and how the war had affected her village. The more Plato heard, the more he realized Bion was a unique individual, the most intriguing female he had ever gotten to know. Plato and Bion had been taking their dinner out on the long foredeck due to the smell inside the hull. Fresh squid actually has no odor, but the same could not be said for the fishermen. As if answering the challenge, Nott had also ceased bathing and lived off cigarettes and snake wine. Plato sensed this was in large portion due to the shock and stress of the previous few days. Plato had caught a juicy tilapia, a native fish to these waterways earlier that morning, and had the chef on board grill it and bring it to them with a bottle of 1960 Jean Dupont Bourgogne Chardonnay that he paid handsomely for. The full moon was illuminating the huge limestone karsts, and Bion looked spectacular in a traditional silk dress with a flower print. Plato was more nervous now than he had been since searching for the Immortals. He was lost for words and eager to drink some of the wine and draw upon its famous properties, resulting in what Captain Schmidt called Dutch courage. Normally confident on the battlefield, Plato was at a loss for words, so Bion broke the silence. "I should be feeling restless right now. We have so much to do, but all I can think about is how nice the breeze feels on my skin and how amazing that wine and fish taste," Bion said, struggling to find the words, the smile on her face both beautiful and infectious. "That's called a near-death experience. Everything feels sharper. I'm betting that fish sitting in front of you will be the sweetest you'll ever taste." "Savor this feeling," Plato said. "Is that how it is with you and Luther? Is that why you live this life?" Bion asked. "No. We're not adrenaline junkies. That's not why either of us became soldiers. In fact, it's because of senseless violence and death that we gave away that life," Plato replied. "But you're still doing this?" Bion said, indicating his current location. "Luther does this because he has a strong moral code. He wants to give back," Plato said. "And you? What keeps you here? Surely you have a home? Friends? Family?" Bion asked. Plato hesitated. "Did I say something wrong?" "No. You haven't said anything wrong. You ask legitimate questions," Plato said, but didn't elaborate. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to pry. This wine is making me bold," Bion said. "I have no family, not anymore. Apart from some distant cousins, my family are long gone," Plato said, his voice sounding distant. Bion could feel his pain coming in waves. She took a big sip of her wine. "Why Vietnam? You're British, not American. Why come here? There must be easier ways to make money without the risk," Bion said. Plato sighed and took a long sip of his wine. "When I was a boy, I looked up to my father. He was a wonderful man, strong, smart, and caring. He made me feel safe and loved, but he was also secretive and absent, Plato said. Absent? He was away on work, a lot, when I was growing up. Doing what? My mother said he worked in export, but I'm sure carrying a gun isn't a requirement in that profession. Did he work for the government? Do you think he was some kind of agent? Bian asked. No. After his death, which no one ever really bothered to explain to me, I began to put the pieces together myself. He was working for a private company. Secretive just like him, Plato said. 11 years ago, I was serving in Malaya as part of the Special Air Service. We were involved in a routine patrol when we were ambushed. We were lucky to make it out. During the course of an interrogation, one of the insurgents mentioned the involvement of the Guild of Wolves in the ambush, Plato said. The Guild of Wolves? Who are they? Bian repeated. I don't know, but it wasn't the first time that I heard mention of this particular private, secretive organization, Plato said. You think that your father was working with this guild? Bian asked. Yes, I do. After serving an additional year there, trying to find out more on the guild, I realized that I was wasting my time. I traveled through Southeast Asia on every lead I could find, no matter how small, until I eventually ended up here, Plato said. And how did you meet Luther? Bian asked. Plato laughed. Now that's a story for another time. That seals today's tale in shadows. We hope Plato Wyngard and the Valley of the Immortals has drawn you deeper into its enigma. Return soon to Crow's Quills books, where the next chapter awaits, whispering secrets yet untold.